97.3 ESPN presents The Sports Bash with Mike Gill. It's time for Football at 4 with 97.3 ESPN.com's Andrew DiCecco, powered by InsideTheBirds.com.
He's in! Touchdown!
Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios, it's Football at 4.
All right, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Andrew DiCecco is with us today. Check out his latest at 973ESPN.com. He's got 10 Eagles that might get squeezed because of the condensed rosters. We'll get into that and more. So let's bring him in at A DiCecco NFL on Twitter, and he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. All right, DiCecco, what's going on, man?
A lot in the NFL world. How you doing, Mike?
It never slows down, and the Eagles, I guess, always jump right to the top of the line. We've been hearing about it for a while. It's not like this came out of right field, but they announced today that they have signed Jason Peters. I guess the part that maybe jumped out of right field is they weren't shy about it. They announced him as a guard right away.
Yeah, that's kind of what I expected the Eagles to do here when they brought in Jason Peters, because, you know, you don't want to kind of undermine Andre Dillard's confidence, right? So, but I do think that listen, we heard a lot of talk even before Brandon Brooks got hurt about Jason Peters potentially returning to Philadelphia. So I do think that, you know, having him there, you know, give the Eagles a crutch, and that's kind of what they're thinking, you know, should Andre Dillard, you know, struggle or falter in any way, hey, you know, you got Jason Peters there to fill in, and you have a guy in Matt Pryor who they've showed confidence in, you know, to this point. They can step in there. Right now, Matt Pryor is going to probably step in and be that swing tackle, which he's probably best suited to play at this stage of his career. But, you know, based on what I've seen, you know, in those limited snaps that he's had, he has starting ability as well. So the Jason Peters signing also adds a lot of depth to an offensive line that really didn't have any. So, you know, we kind of talked about how the offensive line took a hit. And they weren't really considered among the best, despite, you know, what we've heard. But now they're right back up there among the best in the NFL.
All right, so let me get your opinion on this then. Jason Peters, is he back to play right guard or left guard? What's the better fit for him? A guy who's played left tackle primarily his entire career, very, very few of any reps at guard. So is he back to play left guard next to Dillard, or is he back to play right guard to replace Brandon Brooks? What say you?
In my opinion, I think they're going to keep him at right guard and have him just play between, you know, Jason Kelsey and Lane Johnson. Keep him on that right side rather than, you know, shift Isaac Seumalo and put him on the right, and you have Jason Peters playing out of position. You know, if you look at what Jeff Stoughton's done over the course of his Eagles tenure, he doesn't like to have a ton of moving parts in the offensive line. It really, you know, kind of affects the continuity, and he tends to stray away from that. So I think that, you know, to at least impact the offensive line, I think that he'd be best served to kind of slide right in there at right tackle and
right
go
guard
from there. So, yeah, right guard.
We all know how brutal it is to switch sides and change from tackle to guard. So here's a crazy scenario. Is it possible that Jason Peters struggles at right guard and that Matt Pryor actually wins the job?
Yeah, you know, anything's possible, Hunter. And in fact, you know, it's far from a guarantee that Jason Peters just steps right in there and is, you know, and dominates from the guard position. You know, he's never played that before. He's only played on the right side. I believe it was 10 games. His second season, he played right tackle. So this is obviously, you know, unfamiliar territory for Jason Peters. So he's going to probably have his struggle. You know, you're playing on the outside at tackle versus playing on the inside. On the inside, you're essentially playing at a phone booth. It's a lot different. So you kind of got to get acclimated to that. He doesn't have a ton of time to do that. I think if they're going to bet on Jason Peters, you know, being that veteran, you know, being being that he's a 9-time Pro Bowler and 6-time All-Pro, I think that, and you saw that he still had something left. I mean, take Pro Football Focus for what it's worth, but he had an 82.4 overall grade, so he's still playing at a high level. So I think that they're kind of rolling the dice and thinking that he should kind of, you know, adjust seamlessly.
At age 38, do you think that he can handle those defensive tackles compared to the edge rushers?
It's going to be a different challenge because you're noticing, you know, across the NFL, you saw what happened. You saw the contract that Chris Jones got, Aaron Donald, of course, Fletcher Cox. You're seeing all these different types of defensive linemen, particularly on the interior, that are really, they get a lot of pressure up the middle, and they're strong, and they have a lot of quickness in Aaron Donald's case. So it's a lot different than, handling yourself on the edge versus a defense end. So it's going to be a lot to take on for like you said, for a 38-year-old player. It's different technique. Like I said, you're playing in a phone booth, and a lot of these defensive linemen play with excellent leverage on defensive tackles. So it's going to be completely, unfamiliar territory for JP.
Yeah, we had Trey Thomas on about a month ago, and he talked about that very thing was, hey, if he was getting beat up as a tackle, his body is going to take even more of a pounding on the inside. You're going against guys who could be 50, 60 pounds heavier, as a tackle, as opposed to an end. So that's going to be something that he's going to have to adjust to. Trey Thomas also talked about a right-handed stance versus the left-handed stance, and that's a big change. So let's just not assume that Peters is going to come in here. He also talked about how the right guard on the road is a big factor. He makes a lot of the calls. That's something I think Peters will probably be able to kind of, do. But I want to ask you about the deal they got him for. I mean, a $3 million deal could go up to $6 million. I mean, it seems that the Eagles kind of got their cake and they could eat it too. I mean, they got him in on a steal for a guy of Peters' capability.
Yeah, they did, and I think when you compare the contract to what else was out there, the Larry Warfords and players of that mold, I think you get a like you said, they had their cake and they were able to eat it too. They got a player that they know very well. He's still playing at a high level, and the contract's very favorable for the Eagles. So I think that was a great job bringing him in, and pretty much a no-brainer. We've all kind of discussed the prospects of him coming back and thought that was a possibility. It's a little bit earlier than I thought he would be back, but it worked out for the Eagles.
Not to mention, I guess they have a backup plan in the event that Dillard struggles, then they can move Peters right back over to left tackle and then plug Matt Pryor in at that guard spot. So it kind of kills a couple birds with one stone.
Yeah, I really do think that, the bringing back Jason Peters had something to do with Andre Dillard, maybe something that they're not fully sold on, or they just want to, rather than, just give him free reign to, hold that position down for the entire season. There is nobody else on the roster before they re-signed Jason Peters that could step in and play left tackle at a high level. So I think having him there gives them that. Not only does it provide a lot of depth, but you're getting a guy who's still playing at a high level at the left tackle spot. So I think it had a little bit. Obviously, they came right out and they said, listen, he's a right guard. But, there's something that tells me that, they like having him there as a fallback plan at left tackle.
So the Eagles make that move today. They bring Jason Peters back. It's a one-year deal. Now, Peters did say, according to Adam Schefter, that he's 38. He wants to play till he's 40. You wonder, what if he plays well? And then what? You go through this whole rigmarole again next year. Oh, do you bring Peters back? Does he play, right guard? Do you have to move him again? Because if Brandon Brooks comes back and Peters is playing right guard, you would have to almost find a new position again next year if he played well this season. Why wouldn't you bring him back? You would almost wonder.
Yeah, and you look at the contract. Next year it's going to be even more favorable if he does want to play and he plays to his capabilities and stays relatively healthy. I do think that playing on the interior of the offensive line is going to have a little bit more wear and tear on his body, particularly at his advanced age. But if he plays to his ability and is willing to come back for another year under similar terms, I think that would be a no-brainer.
Where do you rate this current offensive line compared to the rest of the league?
Well, before today's signing, I wasn't super high on their prospects. I thought that, you have a question. There's a big question mark there in Matt Pryor. And more importantly, the depth behind him was very questionable at best. But right now, I guess I would have to put him probably in the top 10. I mean, Isaac Seumalo is the weak link of the group. He's played well in spurts, but he has struggled in pass protection, and that's something to keep an eye on. But I think that moves the needle and pushes them into the top 10 category.
By the way, Pro Football Focus just ranked their offensive lines and had them at number 10. So that was before they brought Jason Peters back. So one of the reasons is they really like Andre Dillard as a pass blocker, and they like Matt Pryor as a right guard as well. So they had him slipping from the number 1 at the end of 2019, dropped him down to number 10th entering the 2020 season. I wonder if they'll make a quick amendment on that since it was just a couple of days ago. I want to get your take. There was a poll at The Athletic that asked agents about the GMs. They asked who was the smartest GM in the league, and the winner was one Howie Roseman. Do you think Roseman gets enough respect from the Eagles fans?
No, I don't. Fans are sometimes prisoners of the moment, and when the team's not doing well, or when a young player is plugged in and they're not playing to the capabilities, they want instant results. They want, we got to go sign somebody. We got to do this. Well, it doesn't necessarily work that way. If you look at the body of work that Howie Roseman has done, he's brought in, veterans on reasonable contracts that have stepped in and played well. You look at Patrick Robinson, Ronald Darby played well in spurts, all across the board, and especially in that 2017 season. And he's found some undrafted players, and he's you look at what he did this offseason. He got Javon Hargrave and Darius Slay. He's made the moves necessary to kind of help the Eagles move the needle and make them, a significant contender. Sometimes his moves aren't, the results aren't instantaneous, which is what a lot of fans tend to, really harp on. But I mean, I think he's done a great job, over his tenure.
It's no secret that I would say his big knock is drafting. People are not happy with all of the picks that he has made. But
right.
How good do you think he is when it comes to talent evaluating? See, I look at it as, yeah, he might have the last say at times, but it seems like Doug Peterson and Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman all kind of work together to make these type of picks.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a collaborative effort too, Hunter, especially when you're looking at deciding the 53-man roster. The one knock on Howie, I will say, has been the draft aspect of his job. There's been a lot of whiffs in there. There's been some picks he certainly would like to have back. There were some head scratchers this year, but let's see how it plays out. Before writing this draft off as questionable or another lost opportunity. But I think it is a collaborative effort when they do their final decisions on who makes the roster. But yeah, the one thing that I would say that Howie really, I think that fans really they look at when they don't put him up there with the top GMs in the NFL is they look at his draft history, and it hasn't. When you look at it, some of the picks are a little bit painful, but overall, I think he's done a pretty good job.
We're talking with Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. I want to go to, now you wrote an article today about 10 players that could be affected by the condensed roster. And this is the thought that the NFL could trim rosters from 90 to 75. And there's some names on this list that popped out to me. Now, the ones that I think that popped out to me the most, one was Mike Warren. We talked a little bit about him, but at that running back position, because I figure Warren as a running back, and to some extent Adrian Killins as well, they would be in kind of a competition with, let's say, like Corey Clement.
Yeah, they would probably be in competition with Corey Clement. And if you listen to what Adam Kaplan said on the Inside the Birds podcast, I guess within the last month or so, he mentioned how the Eagles wanted to get a long look at Elijah Holyfield. So when I'm looking up and down the roster of potential guys that might get squeezed if they have to trim the rosters, I think that he would be one of them. I don't necessarily know if he can carry 5. And, I was also taking into account that they could potentially sign a veteran this summer to kind of round out that group. There's some intriguing guys that I think may find themselves on the outside looking in if they're forced to, trim it down 10 to 15 guys. We talked about Mike Warren. I spoke about him I was very high on I am still very high on his prospects. I spoke about him on the show a couple months ago. And then you look at Deontay Barnett. He's a bottom of the roster guy, but he's a guy that's still only 22 years old. He was kind of thrust in there at the last game of the season. It would have been nice to see what he could do. I think Rob Davis is going to be okay as far as I don't think he'll get trimmed right away. If you look at the roster, they don't have anybody. Alshon Jeffrey is going to start the season on the PUP list, so likely. So the only other X on the roster is J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. besides Robert Davis. So I think that kind of gives him a fighting chance. But then, Shelton Gibson, this is probably going to be the last season for him. It just hasn't worked out for him. He's got the speed, but he hasn't been able to kind of carry over his special teams performance over to the offensive side of the ball. And then you look at Dante Olson, an FCS standout, 397 tackles at Montana. Montana's all-time leader in tackles. Ran a 4.8 at the combine. That's the reason why he didn't get drafted. But he kind of reminds me of I don't know if you guys remember in the early 2000s, the Eagles had a player named Jason Short who was a special teams madman. And he kind of has that same, he kind of reminds me of that. So I think he can step right in and play special teams and make an impact there right away. So there's some guys here that I think could help the team, but we'll never know because they may find themselves, on the outside looking in.
Olson's a guy that I like. Would love to get a chance to see him in some preseason games, which probably won't happen either. The other guy on that list that I was a little surprised by was Joe Osman, who they really liked last year, and it seemed like they were almost creating a position for him, and then he tore his ACL, and you wonder if now, missing a whole year, and he was kind of a wild card to begin with, if this condensed roster just kind of pushes him out of their plans.
Yeah, Joe Osman's been a favorite of mine, since 2018. He's undersized, but he plays with a relentless motor. He's an effort guy. He's terrific in the meetings and on the practice field. He gives the starting defense, starting units a good look. And he was going to make the team. By all accounts, he had the roster made. They were moving him in like a Joker type of role where they can kind of move him around and to take advantage of his pass rush acumen. But, then he tore his ACL at the open practice, and he kind of became an afterthought. And they traded for Jannard Avery, a fourth-round pick for Jannard Avery. So now that's kind of signaled to me, that is the Osman role. Jannard Avery is going to be a part of this team moving forward. But now it's kind of where does Joe Osman fit? He's not sitting above Sharif Miller on the depth chart. He's certainly not sitting above Josh Sweat. Deshaun Hall's coming off the ACL, so he's not really going to be a factor. But if you're going to trim somewhere, it's going to probably be somebody who's 6th or 7th on the depth chart, and right now that's Joe Osman.
Speaking of defensive ends, I can't get Derek Barnett out of my mind when thinking about this defense, and I asked Mosher something similar yesterday. I would like to get your opinion on it. If he's just average moving forward, do you think his time is running out here, or do you think average is good enough for Derek Barnett here in Philly?
Yeah, I heard Moshe kind of equate that to Brandon Graham, who's kind of, made a living off of, he's never had the double-digit numbers in sacks, and he's always hovered around 9.5 on his best seasons. And but I think it's a different type of player than Derek Barnett. I think Brandon Graham's he affects the running game. He does certain things. There's certain aspects of his game that I think really helps the defense. Whereas Derek Barnett can be a non-factor against the run. He's had some bonehead penalties, some unnecessary roughness penalties. Coupled that with his injuries, and I do think the time's kind of running out on a player like that. You kind of hear rumors of potential Jadeveon Clowney and all these different types of potential additions, and you don't really have those. Obviously, you don't hear that kind of chatter if you're happy with your first round pick for 2017. So I do think that if it doesn't come together this season for Derek Barnett, you turn the sundial over and his time's starting to run down.
Yeah, he's been a tough guy to kind of put a finger on at this point because he's been hurt so much, and when he's played, it's not like he's jumped off the page. But he hasn't been terrible either. I mean, he hasn't been a bust. It just hasn't been a Pro Bowler either. He's just kind of been there. But we'll see. This could be a very big year for him. What about you? Listed about 10 guys who are undrafted guys who maybe would have had a shot, but because of the condensed rosters. What about veterans? Are there any of the guys that are veteran players that, having this weird training camp and possibly no preseason games, could squeeze them out?
I think when you get a player like potentially a Rasul Douglas, who's going to he has an uphill battle to make the roster. I mean, you look at some of the back end guys. It's still a veteran like a Rudy Ford, who is a special teams dynamo. They acquired him last season for his special teams performance, but I don't know how he fits into their plans potentially without a preseason. He's kind of a one-dimensional player. He doesn't really factor in on defense over his career with the Arizona Cardinals. He didn't really factor in on defense. So immediately when that comes to mind, possibly a Jatavis Brown, the linebacker who they acquired from the in free agency, who was formerly with the Chargers. If you don't get enough, like a long look at a guy like that who does have some injury histories, I think you would look to move forward with. Obviously you have your draft picks. You have Nathan Gary, you have T.J. Edwards, so I'm really high on his prospects this season. He'd be another veteran that kind of springs to mind.
Funny, they just did this over at ESPN.com, and the guy they listed that could be in trouble was Rasul Douglas. And some of the other guys, I guess Corey Clement was one I threw in there. Hassan Ridgeway, he's a 5-year guy who there's a lot of competition at that defensive tackle spot. So
I like Ridgeway to stick as the 4, but I think that they may end up keeping 5 given the injury history that they've had at the position. You look at a guy like Raekwon Williams, you notice I didn't put him on that list. I think he should be safe, because I think that if you get a long look at a guy like that, he could play his way onto the roster. But I do agree with you there on Corey Clement. He's far from a lock.
Yeah, and they got a lot of interesting running backs in here. Talk with Andrew DiCecco, Football at 4, of course, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. And we'll leave you with this. The Eagles, or the city of Philadelphia, announced today that no fans will be allowed in attendance the entire season until February 2021. There'll be no large gatherings, so no Phillies games and no Eagles games. The NFL, they have that competitive balance rule, right? So if the Eagles can't have fans, would that then say that other teams also can't have fans?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that's very interesting, because if you remember Adam talking about the equity rule, everything has to be, even playing field. And how can you have the Eagles that have no fans, and you go on the road someplace and they have, they're sitting at, 40% capacity. That's just not, that's not, can you imagine, what Jeffrey Lurie he would be in an uproar. So I think that it's going to be ultimately what we kind of feared, all along, that there may not be any fans, that there won't be any fans in NFL stadiums.
Yeah, that's the way it looks. We'll see with that equity rule. I know Adam brought that up on our show during Football at 4. We'll have to take a deeper look what that means. Hey, they can have 25% if you have 0, or they can have 10% if you have 0, or you have 0, they have to have 0. That's something we'll have to do a little research on. Andrew DiCecco at DiCecco NFL. For more, go to 973ESPN.com. All right, Andrew, we'll talk to you Friday.
All right, guys, take care.
And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.